Welcome to the Answer is Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to the Answer is Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We've had, as usual, a bunch of great guests on the show, and we're starting to stack them up and get them from all over the country. Today's no exception. I've got a great referral over from David Meltzer's crew, and I love when they reach out to me, have somebody on my show, and I've got Dave Ferrera on the line, all the way from Orange County, Costa de Caza. Dave, how's it going?
It's going great. It's not too hot yet. I'm doing well. The sun's out.
It's funny. I have an office down in Southern California. My listeners know I'm up in Montana now, but my office down there. And I've been getting these emails from SCE, the electric company, right? And they're all saying, conserve, turn your AC off, in the day, or, set it at 80. I'm like going, holy cow, I could imagine setting
it at 80.
Yeah. Right? They're trying to preserve their energy down there.
I thought 72 was fair.
Hey, I like a clean 72, that's for sure. So, hey, thanks for being on the show, taking some time out. You know the nature of the show. We spent a brief minute talking before, but I would love to hear your background. What you're doing right now is fascinating. So if we can lead into that from your past, maybe take us all the way back to your college days or where your early influencers were.
Yeah. My father was a tool and die engineer. So he designed molds to injection mold plastic parts. So I grew up around the tool and die shop ever since I can remember. Mm-hmm. And I go to the shop, there'd be metal chips and shavings on the floor. There'd be bridge pour machines and lathes and all these EDM machines. I used to sweep the floors there when I was 12, 13 years old. That influenced me to go to school to become an engineer. But I was really in love with playing sports. I was a baseball player and a hockey player, so I loved team sports. I love baseball so much, but then I couldn't wait for hockey to start, and it just kept spiraling. And then I ended up playing baseball in college. I think the engineering was somewhat of an afterthought because I thought I was going to play for the Red Sox someday, but that was never going to happen. But however, that taught me what team meant and what work ethic and training was. Later in college, probably, I think it was my senior year or junior year, it was the week of my sister's wedding. My grandfather had an ischemic stroke. And back then, I only knew of one type of stroke. You would go to the nursing home in the 80s to see one of your relatives or grandmothers, and they weren't speaking. They were partially paralyzed. And I was like, that's happening in my own Pepe.
Yeah.
And he had a surgery. It was a failed what's called the carotid endarterectomy. He was having plaque removed from his neck. And a piece of plaque went up and occluded his middle cerebral artery. I know all these terms now, but back then it didn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
And the neurologist said, hey, he's not going to make it. He had an ischemic stroke. He could speak. He could raise his right arm. So he had a right middle cerebral artery occlusion, but his left side of his body was actually paralyzed. And that's how your brain works. The right side controls the left side. The left controls the right side. And if he had an occlusion in his left middle cerebral artery, he wouldn't have been able to speak, but he would know what's going on. Mm-hmm. Since it was on his right side, he could speak, but he was totally confused. He didn't know who I was, didn't know who the doctors were. He was yelling for God to heal him. And the neurologist said, hey, we have nothing to treat him, not even a drug. He's studying engineering. Maybe you could develop something someday to treat him. I'm like, I'm not a doctor. What is he talking about? Mm-hmm. So I did graduate. Year later, I got a job at a medical device company making what's called angioplasty catheters. These were the first balloon catheters that they would inflate into the heart to move away the plaque and let the blood flow again, versus having what's called a CABG surgery, or a coronary artery bypass grafting, where they would take a vein from your leg and actually go across the heart. Mm-hmm. Angioplasty was just being invented. So I went to work for a company called USCI making those kinds of products. But it was decent med tech. Then I moved to Arizona. I was like, I got to get out of New England. It's cold. Moved to Phoenix, and I worked for another medical company making subclavian dialysis graft catheters. That was fun. I was extruding, molding, making catheters. And I thought that was great, but I got recruited to come back to Boston, work for Boston Scientific, a big team. I was making different types of catheters, and I met this old Chinese wise man James Wong was his name, and he was like, "You got to get into stroke. Stroke's the next, treatment therapy area." I didn't know what he meant, but I was like, "Oh, that's how my grandfather had died." Mm-hmm. So that kind of gave me the thought process anyway. And 5 years later, I co-founded a company with a physician and a business guy to make coils to treat brain aneurysms, which is called the hemorrhagic stroke. So, that's kind of in a bridge version of how I went from, say, an adolescent to my first entrepreneurial role. But that's kind of the path. But it stems around understanding teams and trusting yourself, not worrying about failing. Because we all fail, but you have to recognize what a failure is, but use that to move forward and not make the same mistake again.
What's fascinating to me is just having the capacity to understand that world in itself. That's not where I'm from. I'm a marketing by trade, a food and beverage guy, alcohol, industry guy. When I start thinking about the medical field, it's so intimidating. How do you overcome that? Are you just the type of person where you went into college like, okay, I'm all in on this level of high level of thinking, because it's just kind of about beyond many people's capacity, I think.
I realized I've been successful because I like being around other smart people. I like to listen. I like to be involved in a team, and I don't go to the physician with a solution. I work really closely with physicians who have problems, and they come to me and say, "Hey, I've been having this problem. I have an idea of how to do it, but this is my day job. I'm a physician. Mm-hmm. You're an engineer." So it's a collaboration. It's a team. So I'm not trying to solve a COVID-19 vaccine or do something like that. I work on catheter-based therapies. I work in radiology, and I stay in my lane. That's all I do. So when you approach it with that kind of outlook, with a physician as part of the team, I have people that I've worked with now for 14 years straight. I have another guy that does all my design and engineering work. I have another guy that does all my quality and regulatory, gets me through the FDA. I have another guy that does all the manufacturing. So we're very complementary in what we do. And then we have a different physician for different projects that we're always listening. So that doesn't make it as daunting. I'm not in my garage trying to come up with something all by myself and realize that, if I fail, I have no one to help me out. This is a team effort. And that makes it fun, because when you succeed, you can all celebrate together like you just won the Stanley Cup. Yeah. Or when you lose, you can go, all right, we've been here before. How do we get out of this? And it's not daunting or scary at all. It's challenging and fun.
Talking about creating something in your garage, we had on the show last year the gentleman that created Bull Grills, barbecue grills and the islands and everything. And they literally made them out of cardboard at first in the garage, and then stainless steel, and then made these prototypes. And it just was fascinating how one thing leads to the next. What were some of your early prototypes? I mean, how did you start developing these products?
So that first company that I was involved in co-founding was called Micros in 1997, and I had never made what's called an embolization coil before. And these were invented in the early 90s by a company called Target Therapeutics for the neurovascular field. They were invented years ago by another company which is called Cook. But I never made a coil, which is like a really small slinky, and it's made out of a fine wire of platinum. And my original prototype, because I was like, how am I going to make this and have it be reliable for one of our assemblers to actually make it? Because it has to be reliable and easy to make. I went to Michael's arts and crafts store, and I bought big foam balls, and I bought yarn, and I practiced winding the yarn around the ball until I had a repeatable pattern. Then I brought it into work one day, and I showed an engineer, and he was like, holy crap, that's brilliant. That's clever. And I was like, I've never been called clever before. But I broke it down to something so simple. He goes, I think we can do that. So it went from something massive, the size of my head, that had to be something incredibly small. our corals that we make to treat brain aneurysms, the actual diameter of what's called the primary wind is only 10 thousandths.
Mm-hmm.
That's roughly a quarter of a millimeter. The length of the implants could be anywhere from 1 centimeter to 65 centimeters.
Wow.
And we put these through a catheter that's 150 centimeters because it has to go into your groin, up across your heart, and into the brain. So
Wow.
the physician has to be able to feed it in and push it. So it has to be soft, yet durable, visible under fluoroscopy. But that's the only way I knew how to make it. So it was interesting to the engineers who had made corals before me show up with these foam balls and yarn thinking, what the hell are you doing? This is, we get it now.
Wow.
We never thought of that. So it's good to come into something having no experience before. But I think having the years of experience that I've had and staying in the same lane, it reduces risk and all that. But
okay, maybe I have the silliest question, but this is not from your industry. So you've got the catheter going through the groin, and you're pushing the product through the vein. How do you keep it from how do you keep it from going left or right and going right where you want it to? I've always wondered.
So there's a series of catheters and what's called guide wires. So there's a piece of metal, it's called the guide wire, and the end of the wire has a soft coil again. And you would introduce the wire in the catheter at the same time. And as you want to steer the catheter, you would actually advance the guide wire. The guide wire will have like a little hook on the end, and it can rotate and turn and go into another artery. Then you can advance the catheter over it, straightens it out, then you can move it up. So you can use that guide wire. It's kind of like a highway system.
Sure.
And the guide wire is like a train that's kind of going through.
Yeah. Fascinating.
This is called radiology. It was developed, I think in the 1950s or 60s by a physician in Oregon called Charles Daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are now, 70 years later, getting into the brain, treating strokes.
It's fascinating to think about how far we've come medically. And I know that's a silly question, which you guys obviously know by heart, but for the rest of us, normal, people on the outside, we're going, how do they get it all the way up there in the brain? And the discoveries that are made through technology is pretty incredible. You have a quote that I read: innovation impacts lives, the lives that we love. And it goes on to say, it gives us more memories, more smiles, more laughs. Innovation is at the heart of hope. And, I loved reading that. And that's really kind of what struck me in terms of my interest of wanting to interview you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think innovation is everywhere, and it isn't just in healthcare. Mm-hmm. And I think innovation truly comes from the users. It could be somebody making a smartphone. It could be somebody making a Frisbee. And they're innovating because, they have a problem or they just want to have more fun, right? So, I innovate in, say, manufacturing, but I work with physicians who really have serious problems in their day-to-day, practice. And they're the innovators. They're the users. So I come in and try to solve a problem with them. And when you solve a problem, at least in healthcare, it prolongs life. It doesn't prevent the end of something good. It keeps things moving forward. It keeps family closer together with us. So I think that word innovation can be applied across so many market sectors. And if you can provide a service, provide a product, then you can provide a business, and that's innovation.
Yeah. How do you think people, I think people are innovative every single day, whether they're in their garage tinkering and all of a sudden they do something a certain way. It's like, oh, that worked out pretty good. How do we identify that we're being innovative and there could be some value to that? Because another thing that you said is you want to connect with people that are passionate about innovation because the power of collaborating, right, and great minds. And I think oftentimes people are innovative, but they forget to collaborate or connect.
I was an athlete growing up. I still play sports, and I'm still in a beer league.
So the best kind?
I'm sorry?
The best kind of league?
The best kind. And if you're involving people, you could be communicating, and that's innovation. You could come up, social distancing. That's an innovative word now. I never heard that.